Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our fourth panel of the day. This is a discussion all about what it's like to become a lawyer at a global law firm. I'm Leah. I'm the Global Talent Head of Research at Chambers Student Guide, and I'm joined today by four fantastic speakers. We've got Rebecca Bothamley, who is a partner at Mayer Brown. We've got Arjun Dar, who's a trainee at Goodwin. Ben Perry, the graduate recruitment partner at Sullivan and Cromwell, and Esther Tampuris, who is here. She's just got her camera off because of a couple of Wi-Fi issues. She is a partner at INTS. So thank you all very much for joining me today. I wanted to start off with what we mean when we say global firm. Are we talking about offices? Are we talking about the type of work that the firm does? Ben, let's start with you. How would you define a global law firm?
Thank you, Leah, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here today. I think it's a term that can really mean different things to different people. It's also a phrase and a term that's evolved over the course of my career. I think it's fair to say that actually the original, the first global firms were US firms from Wall Street that in the early part of the 20th century started doing extensive work outside the United States and establishing offices. More recently, I think there's, everybody knows there's a number of UK headquartered firms who've expanded significantly internationally and probably have offices in over 20 countries and, anything up to 30 or 40 offices in the firm as a whole. But I think what it comes down to is actually the work that you're doing and the parties that you're dealing with, and in any sort of international firm, most, if not all, of your work is going to have that cross-border element. I think it's also fair to say that the opportunities and the breadth of firms that there are, again, is a lot different to what it was when I was first starting out, where actually there were, to take an example, there were relatively few opportunities for trainees to spend time abroad during their training contract.
Yeah, hopefully we'll talk a little bit later about those opportunities. The point you make about that model of US firms being based in London. We've got three firms here: Mayer Brown, Sullivan and Cromwell, and Goodwin, that fall into that bucket. But Esther, INTS is a little bit different in that sense. Would you add anything to what Ben has said there?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I think it works a bit differently in the sense that because we've been doing shipping for a number of years now, and the expansion of the offices is based on where the big ports are and where our clients trade. It makes a difference that we have offices where our clients may have disputes. So even though nowadays it's not just about having offices in many jurisdictions, the work can still have a global side to it, even if you're doing it out of London. For us and in shipping, having those offices in those major ports is needed and does make a difference.
Yeah, fantastic. And so let's talk about the training experience at a global law firm. Obviously, Arjun, I'm going to come to you and ask you about your experience as a trainee. But firstly, Rebecca, I wanted to get your take on this because you're involved in the you interview candidates for training contracts. What do you think students need to be aware of when they are applying to a global law firm?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is, it's a tough process, right? And expect rejection. I can't count how many rejections I got when I was applying. It's a competitive environment, so it's that's really the first thing to expect, and first thing to really be aware of, that rejection is going to happen, but keep plugging away. And it is a tough process. You go through different stages, and each firm has different ways of assessing candidates, but it will always end in an interview, usually, or in a VAC scheme, which is really a very long interview. And that whole process is there and designed to assess different elements of, you know, what that firm is looking for. And one of the key elements of that is just trying to understand from the candidate how much they want to work in your law firm, and particularly in the type of law firm they're applying to. So one thing in terms of is understanding expectations is really kind of researching what the law firms you're applying to, particularly if you get to interview stage, what they are, you know, where they, not just where they are based and what offices they have, but really who their key clients are and what their key client base is, and really understanding that is key. And you have to also, you know, want to be part of that. You know, if you like certain modules in your degree or at law school that are more akin to, say, employment or IP, that's all great, and most law firms do have that kind of full service capability, but fundamentally a lot of the big clients that we have are banks and big corporate PLCs, so you have to kind of want to work in that environment and with those types of client. I guess that's the key thing I'd flag for these, you know, especially when you get to interview stage, because you do get tested on knowledge of the law firm in particular and that kind of thing, and that is quite difficult actually. I always feel a little bit guilty in a way for asking those questions. It's quite hard to find that information just from looking at a website. You know, there's various other ways that you can talk to people, obviously, in the market, and other areas like chambers, obviously, that give you a bit more, I guess, qualitative information about practice areas and what that firm is very good at. So use all of those, but fundamentally, I think it's about research, and you know, that's what really the law firms are looking at when they interview you.
Yeah, great advice. Research is absolutely key. So going on the firm's website is step one, but you do need to read around that and see what's out there. And so obviously for training contract research, Chambers Student is a great place to start, but also using the Chambers and Partners rankings to see in which areas a firm excels in is a very easy step you can take to inform yourself about a particular firm. And then I also really like that you make that point about prepare for rejection, because just 2 days ago we did a webinar with BPP about on this topic and resilience in the face of rejection. And if you're going into a legal career, you do need to expect that and be prepared for it, but not to give up on it. So Arjun, let's come to you now. You are here representing the trainee point of view. So tell us a little bit about your experience at Goodwin so far. What seats have you done? What kind of matters have you been able to get exposure to?
Thanks very much, Leah. I'm a first seat trainee, so I've just completed my first seat. I start my second seat on Monday. My first seat was a corporate seat in technology and life sciences, and my team does a lot of venture capital type work and biotech work. So our clients tend to be venture capital funds, startups, and we get a lot of biotech companies as our clients as well. I've been involved with a lot of financings at different stages of the company's growth. So seed financings, Series A, B, C. I was involved with one M&A deal. I've also been involved with biotech deals, including a couple of corporate reorganizations, which are complex but interesting. And they involve working with our Washington, D.C. and New York offices, which was a nice bit of exposure. The most exciting deal I've been on was a Series B fundraising for Zap, which is an on-demand grocery delivery service. And if you spend an hour in central London, you'll see at least 3 ads on buses, taxis, bus stops. I guarantee it. And so the deal was interesting both in terms of work and exposure, but it's also fun as a first seat trainee to be part of something so fast-paced and visible. It's one of the big changes from university when you're actually part of something this exciting.
Yeah, something that you can actually see something that you're working on. That must be a real moment in the training contract. So those are some of that's the highlight reel. What are some of the maybe more challenging aspects of doing a training contract with a global law firm, and how do you handle those kinds of challenges?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's a few that are well known. So long hours, for example. It's well known that if you're a trainee in a city law firm, that you can expect to work pretty long hours. These are definitely a reality. I would say a couple of things about that. I think long hours are only painful if you don't like what you're doing, in which case they feel very, very long. And if you don't like what you're doing, even short hours can feel very, very long. But if you like what you're doing, or you find purpose in it, it can be really fulfilling. I would also say that it's not all that different from university. I've been at the library at 11 p.m. revising for a supervision or an exam, and I've been at work at 11 p.m. and it's not all that different. So if you are okay at university, you shouldn't feel like it's a big shift in the working world. There are a couple of challenges that I hadn't fully anticipated that I think are worth keeping in mind. The first is that you start again at square one. Sometimes you feel that you've been through 20 odd years of study, and here you are finally ready to go out and show the world what you've got. But the first thing I felt when I was in my first week of my training contract is that I knew absolutely nothing, which is, there is a big difference between studying law academically and working in legal services. And so you've got to get ready to sit down and learn all over again. You've got to be ready to make mistakes, but only once and never again. And you've got to learn that people have different working styles, how to adapt to them. And it's stuff like that. There's also, I think, some of the skills that are required in the working world are similar to university. So you've got to be hardworking, you've got to be dedicated, you've got to be well prepared. But some of them are also quite different. They're the kinds of skills that you wouldn't have had exposure to or training in university. You have to, for the first time, be service oriented because you're providing a service rather than consuming one. You have to be proactive, you've got to be responsive, you've got to learn how communication works in a work environment. You have to be resourceful. And one thing that really helps is being happy and friendly, because you want to be the kind of person people want to work with. And I've actually found quite unexpectedly that now that I'm at the end of my first seat, I am a lot more outgoing than I was at the beginning. I didn't think that was what was going to happen, but it has. That's part of the training contract, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that description of starting and feeling like you know nothing, that's something that we hear a lot at Chamber Student when we're interviewing trainees. It's almost like the analogy would be when you're learning to drive and then you get your driving license, but you don't really start learning to drive until you're actually out there on your own. Esther, I wanted to come back to you. You mentioned earlier sort of the fact that certain types of work are naturally more international in nature than others, and your practice is in shipping litigation. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and the cross-border elements of it?
Sure, yeah. So like you mentioned, I specialize in dispute resolution in shipping, and we are often involved because of that in multi-party and multi-jurisdiction disputes. So for example, if we have a charter party that's governed by English law, but the parties could be from different jurisdictions and the vessel may get arrested in China, or you may have a lien on the cargo exercised in Hamburg, for example. So the fact that we can immediately reach out to our colleagues in the relevant offices, obtain the advice that we need from the jurisdiction, and just form kind of a multi-jurisdictional team under one roof to tackle the issue is very helpful to clients. And more often than not, it's not just the advice in this kind of issues, so arrests and liens and what have you. You normally need a local lawyer to go to the port or to the vessel or to the local court to get the necessary orders. So it's having someone physically on the ground in these jurisdictions, as well as someone that can offer the relevant advice from that jurisdiction. So that's how the various offices can come together in the disputes that we have.
Mm-hmm. And do you have trainees that work with you in your department?
Sure, yeah, we often have trainees in these teams because there's so many different stakeholders, as you can imagine, in these disputes, that things move very fast. So we normally involve trainees first just to get a taste of how it works and how this multi-jurisdictional dispute can come together. But also trainees are often asked to be the contact point or to be liaising with the various teams, the various offices, to be coordinating everyone in the different time zones, making sure that any issues arising are being dealt with. So I would say trainees get a lot of responsibility quite early on at INTS, and that's just one of the examples of what they may be doing. And also they could be in charge of collating information or documents from different offices and different jurisdictions. So yeah, they're quite involved in these as well.
Mm-hmm. One thing that can shape or partly shape a trainee's experience at a law firm is intake size. If you're part of an intake that is, if you're one of 40, it's maybe going to be quite a different experience to if you're one of 5 or 6 in single figures. So Ben, at Sullivan and Cromwell, you've got quite a petite trainee intake annually. How would you say that shapes the trainee's experience in the training contract?
I mean, I think it's very much one of the things I've observed over the past decade or so is people, increasingly understand and appreciate the distinction that you've just drawn between the very large trainee intakes and the smaller trainee intakes. And I think people are, in my experience, are drawn towards the smaller trainee intakes because they offer greater opportunities for involvement and responsibility at an early stage. And actually, a lot of what Arjun was saying, I think, chimes with my own experience running a trainee program that's similarly sized to the one that he's participating in. That setup is not going to suit everybody. I notice some of the large firms at times sort of, I think pre-COVID, sort of marketing the trainee experience almost as an extension of university, talking about, sports teams, social opportunity, social clubs, societies, that sort of thing. You're going to get some of that at a smaller firm, but not to the same extent that you would otherwise. The other thing I think I'd observe just generally is that now, whatever the firm is, the way in which firms are much more organized in terms of how they deal with trainees before you walk in the door. My own memory, albeit a relatively long time ago, of sort of coming into a training contract was you signed a letter and you almost didn't hear anything until 2.5, 3 years later. You walked in the door for your first day. In those days, people were going off on the LPC. Actually, weren't even in the same place as your trainee cohort studying the LPC. So now most firms require people to do the LPC and the GDL together. So you arrive on your first day actually knowing your contemporaries, quite well already. Again, I remember coming to the first day of a training contract and actually probably only knowing half a dozen people in the room out of a sort of 50, 60 person intake. So the first thing I had to get over was just getting to know the people who are my contemporaries, and you wouldn't have that these days either. The other thing I think that where it's, again, in any training contract, you can only do the number of seats that will fit into a training contract. So whether that's 4, 5, or 6, depending on how the firm is organized. So there may be, in a large intake, there may be a large menu of things to choose from, but you can still you're only going to be able to do so many. And also those choices that you make in your training contract do impact on your choices when it comes to qualification and your career path post qualification. So it's it's very important to be well informed about those.
Yeah, a very important consideration to look at the seat allocation and at a firm and think about whether it aligns with what your intentions are, or what your aspirations are, and also what is probably worth pointing out for listeners who may not be aware of this, that when we're talking about intake sizes, it's US firms in London are known for having those kind of more petite intakes, sometimes single figures. So it can have a very big impact on your experience as a trainee. What do you think opportunities to go overseas will look like going forward as we kind of continue to adapt to living with COVID? Are there going to be fewer opportunities for overseas seats, or will we see a return to pre-pandemic times?
I think we would ultimately hope and expect to get back to something approaching what we were doing before. Obviously, it will depend within any firm on what the footprint of offices and what the opportunities were. So to give an example, we had always sent a trainee on secondment to Hong Kong. Right now, even though we're coming out of things in the UK and restrictions are being lifted, clearly they're going in the opposite direction in Hong Kong, for example. So that's but ultimately one I would expect that will end, and we will go back to sort of sending someone there. And I think that the same would be true of all of the other the other places where we had sent trainees before as well. It will come back. It's just a question of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know a lot of trainees, it's a real focus for them in terms of secondments particularly, but there are kind of other international opportunities, I think, and that certainly go beyond the training contract. So I mean, we're in a similar position to you, Ben, in that we had some rolling secondments that obviously had to stop both ways, and we swapped trainees in Hong Kong, for example, but there's probably more opportunities actually at associate level, frankly, than at trainee level, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think sometimes in our US offices, for example, don't quite understand what a trainee really is because they don't have them. So that it's actually more beneficial if you want to be in the US to go as a qualified lawyer, because they understand that and you can kind of assimilate more easily, I think. So I think whilst they're going to come back slowly, you're not going to miss out. There will be, if you come to a global law firm like this, there will always be opportunities to go abroad. I did a year in New York, 8-9 years qualified, for example. So there are opportunities generally.
What career opportunities do you think training with a global firm can lead to in the future?
I thought this might be a fun one to try and answer, because Joe Biden's nominee to the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, was an alumnus of my firm. So there you go. There's one opportunity that being at a global firm can lead you to. But I think beyond that, we had, I think a couple of weeks ago, one of the partners from the US offices come down to London and say to us that you have traditionally had the thing where you qualify into a law firm and then you sort of work your way up to partner, and that's a traditional path. But increasingly, that a lot of people who don't aspire to partnership, many people decide to go in-house to the companies that they've previously advised. You've got people who've decided, especially in my last team, technology and life sciences, to found startups themselves. And I would imagine it's the same at other firms. My firm especially is very encouraging of it. The idea is that you come and do your best, and then the firm helps you grow towards the opportunities that you feel are best suited for you.
Fantastic. I've just seen a question pop up. So I should have said at the beginning, people tuning in, please do pop your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end of the panel. But yes, bring your questions, please. And then, so people listening to this event right now and listening to what the four of you are saying and weighing up whether a global law firm might be the right destination for them. Who do you think, Arjun, let's stick with you. Who do you think should apply to a global law firm, and how can you tell if you are the right sort of person that is suited to it?
I think one of the challenges I faced when I was applying was really understanding what law firms do and what working in a law firm entails. There is a lot of content on the internet which tells you in detail what law firms do, but it tends to be quite difficult, I think, to draw analogies between what you're reading and the experiences that you've had up till that point. How do you know whether you would like working on large cross-border transactions when nothing you've done so far is analogous to that? And beyond that, how would you persuade an interviewer that that's something that you would like to do? My answer to that question is that there is a fair bit about the work that you simply cannot know in advance. And I think the interviewers know this. You do learn a fair bit about what the job is on the job. But there are certain things that are core to the work that you can know in advance. And I think for everyone, the best bet is to understand these and to make the case that they suit you. A bit earlier, Ben brought up features of working in a global law firm. Those are things to think about. One thing is perhaps, do you like working in teams? That's a very core thing about working in a global firm. Do you like the idea of working in, on deals that have a broader than national element? Are you excited or interested in business or commerce or whatever it is that your firm specializes in? If I told you, for example, that Uber's approach to competition in Singapore was to exit its business, transfer its assets to its biggest competitor, and then take a large stake in that competitor, would you find that interesting? Did you find the news that Roman Abramovich is transferring his ownership in the Chelsea Football Club to a charitable foundation, the beneficiaries of which are the victims of the war in Ukraine? Did you find that technically interesting? This tends to be the commercial angle of things. And from where I'm standing, if you like this sort of stuff, you find it interesting, then you will enjoy the work once you've learned to get good at it. And there was one more challenge that I wanted to point out. When I was in university, there were a number of popular apprehensions about the idea of joining a corporate law